Now what's really cool about the design tool is that basically it's very, very simple. I shouldn't say simple because there are some things that are complicated, but in terms of being able to identify what you want to get started with, those sort of things, it's going to give you the templates, the same thing that you're going to get in Word or whatever it happens to be. Now, this is going to mean we're going to work with a template of some sort. You can, and this is important to know down the line, you can build your own templates. So if you want to go in and you want to build your own template and store it here, you can do so, which then in turn means I can reuse some of the things that I've decided I wanted to put into a form, which is nice. The other thing that's cool, and they just touch on it in here, is that we can actually build parts, template parts. So in other words, things that I need on multiple different forms, but not the entire form, just a piece of the form. And I can actually put those pieces and parts in. So if I knew that I needed to, on a consistent basis, put in a table that has 2 columns in it, and within there it's always going to be like first name, last name, address, whatever, I can build that part and then I can transplant it into different forms. So as opposed to what's the other way of doing it, copy paste, right?
Right.
Same idea, but this is that makes it reusable, which is kind of cool. It's something that when you go to work with these, you're going to find that your users are going to have the ability to have data validation on what they put in it. So when you go and you actually design your form, you can say this form has to have in this field a specific date, and you put rules in place. Like for instance, if I'm going to ask for vacation days, maybe it has to be at least 7 days away from today. And you can go in and you can build that logic into it so that you're certain that they're not putting in invalid information. And part of the really important part of that piece is if you're tying this back to a database, which you can, what you're doing is you're avoiding having an unnecessary round trip to the database and the database saying, sorry, that doesn't meet my standards, and sending it back. What you're doing is you're building your business logic into the form itself. Although your database probably still has that logic in the background, you want to build it into the end user's experience so they're finding out right away. Just like when you're on the internet. You go, you put something in and it says, nope, that's not valid. They're not sending it to their server and saying it's not valid. There's something in the browser that's actually telling you it's not valid information. It's just a matter of not only building the logic for the database reasons or the manager's sanity reasons when they get stuff, but the other thing is that it makes it so it's easier on the user too, because they know, okay, I put in what's valid, I put in what's not valid, and that does help quite a bit. One of the things that I want to show you is what the design tool looks like, and then I'll show you what the filler tool looks like. So I'm going to cheat for a second, and I'm going to open a form that they gave us for class, and I'll build one in a little bit, but let's just start with cheating. Because it's just easier than building from scratch, and by the time I build it from scratch, you're going to go, how did she get, what was she trying to talk about? So, all right, so let's just go ahead and let's just see if they've got anything in this. There we go. We'll just grab one of these. Okay, I'll grab this guy. Okay, so this is the design interface, okay? And what you're going to see is that it uses the ribbon just like all the rest of the Office tools use the ribbon. Control and F1 is supposed to minimize, there you go, minimize the ribbon and bring it back. So if your form is getting to the point where you're scrolling a lot and you want to just minimize that to look at it differently, you can do that. So Control plus F1. Now, as you go through and you're working on the various locations, obviously this ribbon is going to change what's available, what's not available, as per what you're actually working on. When you're in the design mode, as you go into different areas, you're going to see that it's going to give you different options. Like, for example, right now I'm in what's called a table. The region here, this entire region, is a table. So the minute I click in the table, you're going to get a tab that says Table Tools. And then when you put things into the table, which we call those controls. Like, for instance, if I decide I want to go in and I want to put another type of field in place, you have your control box up here. And what you do is you go and you grab whatever control you want, like, for instance, maybe it's a date picker or whatever it happens to be. And you can very easily just double-click, and it puts the control in for you. Makes it real easy. You don't have to drag and drop, position it. It's based on where your cursor is. The thing to keep in mind is that it does want to fill the entire area, so if you want that control to be smaller, you can size it just like anything else. You can make it obviously taller and those sort of things. But what goes with that is that whenever you are working with a control, there's a tab for control tools up here. And what you're going to see is there's a bunch of properties that are going to show up in here. Quite honestly, the majority of those properties can also be found by going and right-clicking and going into the properties of the date picker or whatever it happens to be. So if you're not a ribbon person, you don't have to use the ribbon, in other words. That's something that's important to keep in mind. The other thing you want to watch for is these fields get put in with generic field names based on what number it is on the form. So for example, there's 15 other fields, so this became field 16. That's all well and good, but the minute that you start to want to put any type of logic behind this, for example, maybe I want to go and I want to write this to a destination database, or I want to write this to SharePoint and I want it to be a column. Well, when you get done and you go to do your publishing of the form and you tell it, I want you to write these things, now you've got to figure out which field is going into where. So what you want to do is you always want to be certain that you change the name of it. So of course you have your properties. There's two ways you can do this. You can name it here, okay? Now let's call it demo. Or on the flip side, we can also name it up here as well. They do have a quick access toolbar up here also, which again is just meant for shortcuts on things. Like if I wanted to go in and want to preview this, okay, there's a quick access here to do a preview, which also can be done with F5. What that'll do is that'll take you from your InfoPath designer to your form filler. You can see in here that the user can go in, they can do what they need to do, interacting with it. They can do, in this case, a symbol is all they can really insert. They can't do much of anything. Basically locking them down, which is important. We don't want the user to be able to go and do anything to it. That doesn't mean that they can't go and save the form and then open it into the design tool, but the idea is that this is what they would be seeing on their end. And it's nice to take it from the design tool into the preview, because that way you can see also what have you actually done. Because you can see here that if I look at my first name, there's no little asterisk there, but did you notice when I was in here, see the little asterisk that's right there? Which basically says it's required field, right? So that's one of the properties, and if you look at the control tools, they have in here default value, cannot be blank. That's what's giving you that asterisk. Real easy to go in and configure. So basically what's going to happen is as you're working on your various locations, you're going to have over here on the right-hand side tools that you can go in and access. So for example, as I mentioned here, I can go in here, I can change the name of something if I want to. This also is nice because it'll take you to where it is on the form. So if for some reason you're not sure where something's located, but hey, I want to look at the field over here, you can click on it, it'll take you to where it is on the form, which is cool. So that's another nice way of getting navigated. Also is very helpful for when you get validation errors. Right before you get ready to publish this, you want to validate it, and it comes up and it'll say, field number 23 is invalid. And of course you stupidly didn't rename everything. So now you can find where is that field, and it'll take you to the field. So that kind of helps too. So there's a lot of really neat things you can do. But again, that's going to change contextually based on what we're actually doing there. Now, there's also something that they call the Backstage View. The Backstage View is, for lack of a better way of saying this, this way I remember it, go all the way back to the File tab, okay? And that's going to give you the Backstage View. This is where you can go in and you can do save as, open other forms, those kind of things. It's also going to give you the opportunity to go in, publish your form, which we'll see that later with SharePoint. There are submit options. So how is the user going to actually submit the form? And then there is a design checker that makes sure that you don't have anything that doesn't make sense in the form itself. One of the things that's neat about it is that if you want to have a browser-enabled form, in other words, open it in the browser, certain controls are not compatible with that. So therefore, it will go through and you can say, hey, I want this to be browser-enabled, and it will say, well, this control can't be used if you're going to put it in a browser, which is kind of nice. It goes through and validates that what you're going to put out there actually will function. And then they have form options. This has to do with browser, digital signatures, those sort of things. Okay. And there's also an options here. And this is where it gets confusing because there's a forms options and then there's an options here. And this is going to break into general InfoPath things. For example, what do you want in terms of the user interface. So what you're going to see is that they can actually have screen tips in your forms. Do you want to show that? Do you not want to show that? Kind of like tool tips. What language do you want to use? You can actually customize your ribbon if you want. So if you want different things on the ribbon, you can tell it which tab to put what on. And you can move things. So quite frankly, if you really don't like where things are sitting, you can redesign if need be. And then that quick access bar at the top, that also can be customized. So if you want to add more links to that, just put it across the top where you're doing a preview and all that, you can do that as well. We're not going to do anything with add-ins in this class. The Trust Center does have to do with digital signatures, which we'll be talking about later on, and that's another thing that's going to be important for you to be aware of, that obviously you need to be able to trust the signature of the form in order for your users to be able to open it. So they would have to have the same trust level set up. We are going to have available to us, as I mentioned, there are some form templates that are already out here. They're not fancy schmancy, but there's something to get you started, if nothing else. They are going to only give you browser compatible forms, which is useful, right? Because you don't want to start with something that isn't going to work. And there used to be more out on SharePoint's site, and I don't see, or not SharePoint's, I'm sorry, Microsoft's site, but I don't really see any available here. It used to be you could connect on in, but you can also download from them, just like you can for Word templates and those kind of things. The forms themselves are going to have XML extensions. So when a user completes a form, it'll be a .xml. When you are building a template, it's going to have a .xsn extension. So basically your templates will have one extension, your forms will have another extension. But regardless, both of them will be able to be opened up and worked with regardless. So if you need help in InfoPath, there's, of course, the little help button there, or F1. We'll also bring it up. And, of course, that's going to try to give you some type of contextual help. For example, you notice it's saying, where's the Backstage View? Well, I'm not really on the Backstage View right now. I'm in File, New, but I guess technically that would be considered Backstage. So it's trying to give you contextually where you are, but, of course, you may have to do a search on it as well. So